Hi, community of awesome. I'm Gabe and this is Bookish Pixie. I'm answering another question this week. Let's take a look. How do you infuse backstory in your chapters without disrupting the overall flow? In most cases, flashbacks appear incredibly jarring, and I've always hated dream sequences. They seem rather amateur. So is it monologues? Third-person point of view monologues? So I do think this is an interesting question, and there are a lot of different answers for it. For me personally, I mainly use 4 different methods to get backstory across. First, if the backstory is about the world, I use world building. If it's about like the history of the world or special information about a certain location, then I'll feed it into the backstory, meaning that when I'm describing this new location, the character will think about what they know about the location when they're there. The key here is unless you're using omniscient point of view, you want to filter this information through the lens of your character, meaning that you don't want to drop information about a setting that your character wouldn't know. The next 2 methods that I use can be used for world backstory or character backstory. Second, dialogue. You can get a lot of information across in dialogue, but the key is that it has to make sense for your characters to be talking about it. I'm gonna give a quick example. Back in December, I saw Aquaman, and one of my biggest pet peeves about the movie was at the very beginning, when they were setting up the world, Aquaman has this discussion with another character about the rules of the world, and it did not make sense for them to be having that conversation because both characters were fully aware of those rules. So it was literally like, as you know, XYZ, and that just didn't make sense for them to be talking about it. Instead, it was a really obvious ploy that was used to get the information across to the viewers, but it just made it really painful and awkward to watch. So similarly, if your characters are having conversation about backstory, whether it's a character's backstory or world backstory, it needs to make sense for them to be talking about it, so it isn't obvious that the only reason they're talking about it is because you want to let the readers in on the backstory. Third, thoughts. I kind of hinted at this with the first one, but I'm gonna go into it a little more deeply, because your characters can think about their own backstory or the backstory of the world. It just has to make sense in context. So one of the more effective ways to get this across is to have them reminded by something in the world. So whether it's an object or a smell or food or a location, something that jars their memory of this backstory that you're getting across. That way it seems natural for them to be thinking about it. The other important thing here is, of course, you can't go on for too long. You want to drop these bits of information, whether it's through your dialogue, whether it's through exposition, whether it's through thoughts, in little bits and pieces. Otherwise, you'll be committing a sin known as info dumping, and you don't want to do that because you will grind your pacing to a halt. And then this last method is specifically used for character backstory, and that's actually flashbacks. I think the reason flashbacks sometimes seem jarring is kind of related to the last point, where it doesn't make sense for the flashback to happen at that particular part of the story. So to me, the key to getting flashbacks and dream sequences, which are also a kind of flashback, to work is to place it in a part of the story that makes sense in context. So like a character sees a location that brings up very powerful feelings for them because of something that happened there. So then they can think about it, which then leads you into the flashback. Or they're there and then they end up thinking about it that night and they dream about it. Either way, it has to make sense given what has happened in the story. You can't just drop it in randomly because then it just doesn't make sense, and yes, it's really jarring. And the other part about flashbacks is that you should really only use them sparingly and only in situations where they evoke very powerful emotions for your character. The thing to remember when bringing in backstory, no matter what method you use, is to spread it out throughout the book and to only give as much information as your readers need to understand the story. So that's what I got for today. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe and comment, and I'll see you guys soon.